Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker. I'm joined by Kieran and Andrieu. How are you doing, Kieran? Are you as hot and sticky and sweaty as I am?
Yeah, I mean, poor Novara viewers and listeners throughout summer must have to hear this so often from us. But it is very, very warm in this studio. I have actually just got a pretty strong fan activated, so I'm okay. Which is why you can see the Palestinian scarf billowing in the background there, Michael. I quite like it.
What I would do for a fan. Tonight we're talking about President Trump and President Zelenskyy holding talks ahead of Trump's in-person crunch talks with Putin. Zelenskyy and Trump were talking over Zoom. As a fourth heat wave sweeps through Britain, the health and safety of workers is coming to question. I speak to someone from the TUC, and we discuss Netanyahu's chilling plan to forcibly displace Palestinians to South Sudan. If you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. On Friday, Donald Trump will meet with Vladimir Putin in Alaska to discuss the future of Ukraine. Now, that's of concern to Ukrainians because no Ukrainians will be in attendance and because Trump has a history of deferring to the Russian president.
People came to me, Dan Coates came to me and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be. I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today. And what he did is an incredible offer.
So that was from Trump's meeting with Putin in 2018, where infamously he sided with Putin over his own intelligence chief, who had accused the Russians of election interference. You'll, I'm sure, remember Volodymyr Zelenskyy has never been given such gracious treatment.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
So that was the last time Trump and Zelenskyy met in February this year in the White House. So what can we expect from Trump's crunch meeting with Vladimir Putin on Friday? Well, earlier this week, Trump suggested that up for discussion would be land swaps.
There'll be some land swapping going on. I know that through Russia and through conversations with everybody to the good, for the good of Ukraine. Good stuff, not bad stuff. Also, some bad stuff for both. So there's good and there's bad. But it's very complex because you have lines that are very uneven. And there'll be some swapping. There'll be some changes in land. And the word that they will use is, they make changes. We're going to change the lines, the battle lines. Russia's occupied a big portion of Ukraine. They've occupied some very prime territory. We're going to try and get some of that territory back for Ukraine. But they've taken some very prime territory. They've taken largely ocean, in real estate we call it oceanfront property. That's always the most valuable property. If you're in a lake, a river, or an ocean, it's always the best property. Well, Ukraine, a lot of people don't know that Ukraine was largely 1,000 miles of ocean. That's gone. Other than one small area, Odessa, it's a small area. There's just a little bit of water left.
So that was Donald Trump's rather unique way of explaining this map. So it shows the areas the Russian military currently controls in Ukraine. So obviously Russia have controlled Crimea since 2014. They now control nearly all of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk. Putin now claims all of these areas are part of Russia. No one recognizes that. And this is the map where Trump looks at that and he says, all of these seafront properties, which the Russians hold, no wonder they want to keep them. So what could a series of land swaps look like? Sky's Michael Clark had this analysis.
There are four areas to think about. One of them is Crimea. Crimea is really important. The Russians will not give up Crimea. The Ukrainians are in no position to take it back anytime soon. So although Crimea is very important legally and militarily, it's off the table as far as present negotiations go. A second area would be the marginal areas up in Sumy and Kharkiv. The Russians, after the Kursk offensive, hold a little bit of Ukrainian territory opposite Sumy, a little bit of territory in Kharkiv. They might agree to withdraw from those territories. It doesn't cost them anything to do that. And it would be a certain amount of withdrawal which the Ukrainians could talk about. That would be a second area, reasonably easy to negotiate. Third area, much more difficult to negotiate, is the Donbass. The Russians say they want the whole of the Donbass as a first step. Well, they hold most of Luhansk, which is one part of it. They hold about 3/4 of Donetsk, but they don't hold the other quarter, which is the bit that the Ukrainians have fought so hard for, really since 2014, not just since 2022. And the Russians are saying they want the whole of the Donbass. And in that area, there are the 4 big cities, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Kostiantynivka, Drushkivka, and those are the fortress cities. They're like a very strong line of defences, and the Ukrainians will be required to give up those strong line of defences and let the Russians in, and west of that it's harder to construct defences. So that's a third area, very, very sensitive. And then a fourth area is that it is reported, I'm not sure at all about this, but it is reported that maybe the Russians would give up some land in southern Zaporizhia and in Kherson as long as they could keep a land corridor between Donetsk and Crimea. So how big that land corridor would be, how much territory they might give up to create that corridor, we just don't know.
So that analyst called it a land corridor. Of course, Donald Trump would see it as a strip of seafront properties. Ukraine giving up land that Russia doesn't already militarily control is seen by lots of analysts as a bit of a non-starter. And Zelenskyy has ruled out giving up parts of the Donbass, which aren't currently under Russian occupation. So he said this earlier in the week: "We will not leave Donbass. We cannot do that. Everyone forgets the first part. Our territories are illegally occupied. For the Russians, Donbass is a springboard for a future new offensive. If we leave Donbass of our own accord or under pressure, we will start a third war." A quickly cobbled together meeting between Ukraine and European leaders today, which was joined by Donald Trump via Zoom, was intended to try and get that point across before Trump gets in a room with Putin. And after that meeting, German Chancellor Merz and Zelenskyy gave a joint press conference from Berlin. This was Merz laying out the European position.
We made various things clear for the negotiations. We made it clear that Ukraine has to be at the table if there are any follow-up meetings. We want to have negotiations in the right order. A ceasefire has to be the beginning of it. Important elements should then be agreed in the framework agreement. And thirdly, Ukraine is willing to discuss territorial questions, but then the contact line needs to be the starting point, and legal recognition of Russian-occupied territory is not part of discussion.
I think that makes... I can't see Ukraine agreeing to give up legal rights to those territories. That's what most people are imagining. It becomes some sort of frozen conflict where Russia de facto, for now, gets to keep the areas it controls. Zelenskyy, I think, constitutionally isn't allowed to give up territory legally, but hopefully they can agree a de facto line so the killing can stop. Merz also said the Europeans agreed amongst themselves that any deal would require security guarantees in place for Ukraine. And Zelenskyy gave this account of his call with Trump.
We also discussed the situation at the front line on the battlefield. I told the US president and all our European colleagues that Putin is bluffing. He is trying to push forward along the whole front. And Putin is also bluffing, saying that he doesn't care about the sanctions and that they're not working. In reality, the sanctions are very effective and they're hurting the Russian military economy. It's right, Russia does have much more artillery and weapons, but Russia has 3 times as many losses. This is a fact.
So it's an interesting argument from Zelenskyy. He's worried that Donald Trump is going to go into a meeting with Vladimir Putin and believe everything Putin says. And he is trying to get in there first and saying, even if Putin tells you he wants peace, and I suppose Putin's going to want to say, it's the Russians that want peace, it's the Ukrainians who are being obstinate and causing this war to continue. Zelenskyy saying, no, that's a lie or a bluff. And then he's also saying, Putin is going to be in there saying, look, we can easily win this war if we want to, even if you wanted to say we're going to stick with Ukraine. This is a lost cause. Oh, by the way, your sanctions aren't really having an effect on our economy because our economy is fine. Zelenskyy wants to say, no, the Russians are struggling. If they don't offer a good deal, then Donald Trump, it is worth your time sticking with us, intensifying the sanctions and giving us more arms. That's his argument. Earlier today, I spoke to Svitlana Romanko. She's founder and executive director of Razom We Stand, which calls for tougher fossil fuel sanctions on Russia in response to their invasion of Ukraine. I began by asking what she expects from Trump's summit with Putin on Friday.
So our expectations are that the US and President Trump in particular won't bargain away Ukraine's future and Ukrainian territorial sovereignty and independence. And Ukrainian expectations overall are the first, that there will be immediate and lasting ceasefire before any territorial concessions, and the Russia will reimburse the damage that has been made by all the destruction and attacks and the war of aggression. That amounts from $500 billion until $1 trillion of US dollars, and also returning all war prisoners and children, maintaining the sanctions on Russia still, including energy sanctions and oil and gas sanctions, and also some other conversations that could potentially, and security guarantees that could guarantee Ukraine's security, which will be strong for the years ahead. So this is what government wants, what people want, honestly, because it was kind of joke, we are kind of really a optimistic nation, even in spite of this horrific war. So our main expectation would be if Trump could actually arrest and imprison Putin and hold him accountable for committed war crimes in Ukraine. So this would be, of course, our main expectation, but we have to be realistic. And realistic, I've already said what is going to happen.
What do you think about territory? So when you say there can't be any territory swapped before there is a ceasefire, do you mean that Ukraine can't give up any territory that Russia doesn't already control? Or would you be happy with a sort of situation where they freeze the conflict along the current dividing line between the two militaries?
The Ukrainians will all be happy when they got their land back. This is undoubtable and non-discussable. But of course, we understand the reality is far from perfect. So, but still, the attitudes among Ukrainian people are that we are not ready to give our territories back, and this is highly prohibited by our constitution. And this must not happen in the near future, because it's not something that our people, our brave defenders, were giving their lives for. So this is a common attitude. But the governmental official position, they've already spoken that. I won't repeat that. And our position as organization is that because the sanctions on Russia is mainly, this is something which still has to be improved and maintained. And I know that it's going to be discussed in Alaska summit between two people, President Trump and Vladimir Putin, who is dictator and aggressor. And of course, Russia wants to have these sanctions lifted. This is for sure, because they are losing huge money. Gazprom has lots of damages, Lukoil, Rosneft, all of them, and their budget is draining. They can't afford more and more military, what they would like to, but not giving any meter of Ukrainian territory to aggressor, because we would welcome him not just to Ukraine, but to Europe as well. And they will think from that point that they can actually invade any country and seize the territory, occupy the territory, and have this territory for themselves. This must not be allowed, because this is not something which is in international laws and accepted world order.
Ukrainians in general seem much more war-weary than they were 2 years ago, which is unsurprising, really. But from a new Gallup poll, apparently 69% of Ukrainians want to seek to negotiate to end the war as soon as possible. That's up from 27% 2 years ago. So it does sound like there is much more of a desire, an understanding that compromises might need to be made, even if they're unjust ones, with the Russians. I mean, how do you interpret that data?
Gallup, it's surprisingly that they've held this survey, because as to me, they are doing some slightly different things, but whatever, numbers are numbers. But I think most of Ukrainians are being thinking of some maybe not that significant territory swaps as is being offered, because everyone is afraid. These are those numbers in place, but know what people speak between themselves, what's on Ukrainian media or what's on social media as well. People are afraid that our 5 regions will respectively go to Russia, and this will be allowed by President Trump. This is very simple, and this is only become possible because the EU and other countries of G7, they didn't react properly for stopping this aggression when it just started full scale back to 2022. And there are 18 or 19 sanction packages is already being discussed, but there are no tight measures on Russian energy supply, and they are still capable of at least some counteroffensives and attacks. And I would say that this is vice versa. And when we speak about territorial integrity, no numbers can help, because everyone who thinks that they are Ukrainians just can't really accept the fact that 5 our regions will be occupied by Russia. We hope they won't. And this is a good opportunity for President Trump actually to step in and to have imposed more strict measures against Russia. We have not been seeing this happening, unfortunately, since the Friday of 18th of August, which was another day of promise to get sanctions on Russian oil, to cut their finance if they don't want immediate ceasefire and if they don't want peace. And we can see that it's not yet guaranteed. And now US has said that it will be just talks, but we know that it's not as simple as that. So this is a hard question, but the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine must prevail. Otherwise, it will be just the beginning of another continued invasion of Ukraine.
That was Svitlana Romanko speaking to me earlier today. Now, just before we went live, Trump gave a press conference himself where Ukraine came up. So let's take a look at what he said.
Yeah. Do you believe you can convince him to stop targeting civilians in Ukraine?
Well, I'll tell you what, I've had that conversation with him. I've had a lot of good conversations with him. Then I go home and I see that a rocket hit a nursing home or a rocket hit an apartment building and people are laying dead in the street. So I guess the answer to that is no, because I've had this conversation. I want to end the war. It's Biden's war, but I want to end it. I'll be very proud to end this war along with the 5 other wars I ended.
So it doesn't seem like Donald Trump is going to believe everything Vladimir Putin says. He also, in that press conference, said there will be severe consequences if Russia doesn't agree to end war. Now, of course, he's also actually, I think he's also suggested he wants to have a meeting soon with Zelenskyy, Putin, and himself. Now, of course, there will be severe consequences if Russia doesn't agree to end the war. If you're Putin, what you want to do is make it seem to Donald Trump as if you have agreed to end the war, but you put forward some conditions which Ukraine can't possibly meet. So you say, look, we want to end the war. All we got to do is swap these parts of the Donbass or whatever. Ukraine say, we can't do this. And then Trump says, well, Putin did agree to end the war. It's Ukraine that won't. Kieran, what do you see happening on Friday?
Well, I mean, so far, the defining features of Trump's presidency, as far as the Ukraine-Russia conflict goes, are as follows. Number one, total failure on every front. Number two, I mean, it's a kind of tabloidy thing to say, but Putin running rings around Trump. I mean, he more or less admitted it there himself, actually. And then number three, and this is kind of indicative of Trump's broader modus operandi, right, is expecting praise and plaudits for being a peacemaker before any of the hard work has actually been done. And I'm speaking about this very dispassionately, but actually it's incredibly sad because the continuation of this just results, the net sum of it is disproportionately Ukrainian deaths, of course, some Russian deaths as well. And I say, as a Palestinian, Ukraine, forget the respective histories and all of that for a moment, but, the death of a Ukrainian life is worth just as much as a Palestinian life, self-evidently. So it's not academic. I think we agree, Michael. I think, Aaron agrees as well that, and we've said many times, and sometimes it's controversial, that pouring endless European and American money into this chaos is not a viable means to an end, because the harsh, as far as I can see, I'm not a military expert, but it seems to me everything I know about this, the harsh reality on the ground is that Ukraine cannot win militarily anymore. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that, the law of the jungle, that might is right, or that the strongest power in all of this should, get every positive outcome. The US is basically never an honest broker in these things. It's got obviously a terrible track record of violent imperialism all over the world over the past 150, 200 years. But what this seems to me to be really, really lacking is a kind of third party great power willing to be firm with both sides. And what all we've seen so far is Trump being very firm with the weaker side, with one side. And that hasn't really got us anywhere. And I want to end, Michael, I hope uncharacteristically, on a conspiracy theory, which is that, and I've refrained from saying this whenever we've discussed this before, but compromat is a Russian word, compromising material. I can't help but feel at this point, given how Trump seems willing to strain every single sinew in his body to protect the kind of Kremlin position on this, that he isn't in some sense compromised by the Russian secret services. Again, conspiracy theory, not really befitting of Novara Live. But I'll end on that. I mean, what do you think, Michael? How do we get out of this?
I mean, I don't think it's impossible that the Russians have compromat on Donald Trump. I don't think you need that, though, to explain how he behaves, because I think essentially Donald Trump does want this war to end. He wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And as sort of a hard-headed, sort of amoral realist, he thinks the way you get peace is you give the stronger side what they want. And so that seems to be what's going on when it comes to Ukraine. I think I agree with you. I think neither Biden nor Trump's strategy is the right one here. What I hope happens on Friday is that Trump says, look, we're freezing the conflict on current lines. And by the way, if either of you break that, there is going to be some very tough consequences. So if Russia breaks that, I mean, you can say it's going to be frozen there. We'll lift the sanctions on Russia. And the moment you move beyond that line, all of the sanctions are put back on you on steroids. And then if the Ukrainians break the line significantly, you can say you're not going to have any of our help this time. That's what I'd do. I don't know if Trump's going to do that. He doesn't seem like a particularly predictable man. But yeah, I'm not sure we need the compromise angle. Your final point on this before we move on.
I think we do need the compromise angle. No, I mean, look, I think what you've said, Michael, about what you hope happens now, given how long this has played out, how protracted and bloody it's been, is eminently reasonable. I mean, again, US, never an honest broker, nonetheless, the only great power that's truly engaging with this. So that's what, we need to see something along those lines. And yeah, we need to be pragmatic and realist about it at this stage, because European idealism, I suppose my final word on this should be, you don't see Keir Starmer walking around in his military fatigues very often anymore, do you? And though all of that money is earmarked, and he would say, well, no, that money's been earmarked. The political bargaining has been made and it's going to Ukraine. I think all of that posturing was largely for domestic electoral consumption, and it really hasn't got us anywhere. So yeah, we need something more, I suppose, hard-headed and along the lines of that which you suggest.
It's interesting. It used to be the case that Western politicians would always go to Kyiv whenever they felt like they were struggling domestically, and as you say, put on the military fatigues. I think actually Kyiv is suffering more now. Drone attacks are sort of doing serious damage in Ukraine's capital, which is somewhat new. Britain has experienced 4 heat waves this year, with 5 regions currently on an amber heat health alert. Of course, it's a sign of what's to come as climate change continues to bite, and it should serve as a reminder of the urgency of reducing global emissions. But it also matters for workers in the here and now. Of course, working in a heat wave, especially if you work outside, is at best uncomfortable and at worst downright dangerous. And London's mayor seems alert to that fact. Sadiq Khan is considering offering flexible working hours for Londoners employed in the public sector during heat waves, with his office currently consulting on a number of different proposals. It's part of the mayor's London Heat Risk Delivery Plan, a strategy for mitigating the risks of increasing heat waves on the health of Londoners. Now, besides flexible working hours, that's allowing workers to avoid the hottest hours of the day, the options being offered for consultation include these. Businesses, schools, relaxing dress codes. We already have that in Novara media. I'm in my shorts. Public awareness campaigns encouraging people to reduce high heat activities, for example, car journeys and construction building. I mean, I'm not really sure what the point is of a public awareness campaign for construction building, because construction workers don't normally get to decide when they work. Expansion of shaded bus stops. Yep, easy win there. Designated water distribution. Yep, guidance on how to keep cool. Fine, slightly less interest in that. Outdoor swimming spaces, big thumbs up from me. So that's my response to City Hall's survey. Of course, it's not just Londoners who've been feeling the increased temperatures. Workers across the country are having to adapt to increasing heat, with employers legally required to protect them from the health risks that may come with it. To discuss the challenges to workers posed by the threat of more frequent and more intense heat waves, I spoke earlier to the TUC's Health, Safety and Wellbeing Policy Lead, Shelly Asquith, and I began by asking her what she's hearing about how workers are being affected by the heat.
We're hearing from workers in all different sectors and all different types of jobs about how they're finding it difficult working in these heat waves that we're seeing become more and more common. So you've got your people working outside, delivery postal workers, you've got construction workers on sites out there in the 30 degrees plus heat, sweating away, and not enough employers are making changes when it comes to a heat wave. So we're asking for things like shift patterns to be moved around, for shaded areas to be introduced, and also people that are working indoors. Not enough of our offices or schools, frankly, have got air conditioning or enough adaptations in place. So relaxing dress codes, making sure that people don't have to wear a tie all day when it's really, really hot. Really easy things that employers should be doing, but all too often are not. So we're getting lots of union members coming to us with complaints, and we're encouraging them to take action and get organised.
And are employers obliged to, provide a cool enough workplace? As far as I understand it, there isn't a maximum temperature, but does that mean they're completely unrestrained in what they can subject workers to?
They're certainly not unrestrained. So there is currently guidance to employers to say that workplaces should be reasonable. Workplace temperature should be reasonable. And existing health and safety law, the Health and Safety at Work Act, for example, is very clear on this. And you've also got indoor workplace regulations like the welfare regulations, which say that there's a minimum working temperature of 16 degrees Celsius. But as you allude to there, Michael, there's no maximum working temperature guidance. That is something that the TUC and unions are calling for, just to make it much more clear to employers what the upper limit ought to be and when they should start kind of taking some of that action. But there's no clear guidance on maximum working temperatures. That's why we're pushing for it.
And as far as I understand, Unite the Union are encouraging bus drivers to sort of refuse to work if their cabs get too hot. Are we seeing lots of walkouts? I mean, is a worker entitled to say these conditions are dangerous, so therefore I'm not going to work? Or do you get in trouble if you do that? Sort of talk me through that.
Yeah, I understand that Unite, I think in London, has instructed its bus drivers that they don't need to work a shift if the air conditioning in their driver cab isn't working during a heat wave. Now, we've been seeing a lot of workers kind of saying that these sorts of issues are happening, and it's good that they're getting really solid advice from their union. I know a few years ago in the last heat wave where we saw temperatures exceed 40 degrees Celsius, the CWU got an agreement with Royal Mail to say that if a van doesn't have air conditioning in it, then that should be taken out of use, and posties shouldn't be out doing rounds above 35 degrees Celsius. So certainly we're seeing agreements between unions and employers. I haven't seen any actual walkouts yet, but there is protection for workers under Section 44 in the Employment Rights Act, which says if you're experiencing serious and imminent danger, and I would say if you're having to work in a non-air conditioned kind of sweat box, basically, which is what the driver cab is, you're completely surrounded by glass, you are at risk of dizziness, dehydration, lack of concentration. And don't forget, it's not just your own health and safety if you're driving a vehicle, you've also got all the passengers to think about. So I think it's perfectly reasonable advice to say, stop the job. It's not worth your life and others' lives to work that shift.
And obviously, these temperatures that we're seeing this summer are unusual for this country. They're not necessarily unusual for lots of places in the world. What's the sort of standard practice? What happens in Spain? What happens in Greece in the summer? Is it normal in other countries for there to be a maximum temperature? What do construction workers do in Spain in August, for example? I mean, what can you tell me about that?
You're right to say it's unusual. We don't usually have summers where we get this hot this many times. This is the fourth, I think, amber warning we've had now, but it is becoming more common, which is why I think we need these sorts of guidance for employers. But yep, Spain, maximum working temperature, Germany, maximum working temperature, China. It's becoming more common for countries to introduce these. I know in some Arab countries, for example, outdoor work is suspended between the hours of midday and 3 p.m. between June and September. Now, we're not getting the kind of climate that Saudi Arabia has, but we do need to be thinking further and further ahead as our summers are getting hotter and climate crisis is upon us.
The TUC, I mean, obviously, your most immediate task is to sort of say, how can workers be protected in the here and now? Does your role sort of also leak into how we can stop the climate crisis, or is that sort of a different brief?
It's not my immediate brief, no, but all of these things are, of course, connected. The climate crisis brings with it a whole host of health and safety hazards. So we, of course, need to be thinking about how we future-proof our planet as well as our workplaces. Certainly, we need a lot of public and private investment to make our workplaces adaptable. We need air conditioning, but we also need to make sure that we're not using up too much energy in the same time. But yeah, absolutely need to be thinking ahead.
In the wake of the mass arrest of over 500 peaceful protesters last Saturday, senior figures in Parliament have begun to doubt how sensible the Home Secretary's ban on the group actually was. Now, that's according to former Labour Cabinet Minister and now Lord Peter Hain, who has said the government is digging itself into a hole over the prescription of Palestine action. Now, speaking to The Guardian, Hain said this: "It will end in tears for the government. We are seeing retired magistrates, retired and serving doctors, and all sorts of people being arrested and now effectively being equated with terrorists such as Al-Qaeda, which is absolutely wrong. It's going to get worse for the government because I don't see people from that Middle Britain background who have joined these protests in such large numbers to suddenly decide that all is okay. In fact, I think more are going to come out and face arrest because the approach to Palestine action is contrary to every form of peaceful protest in British history, whether that's the Chartists and suffragettes or anti-apartheid and anti-fascist protesters." Hain may well be proved right. Campaign group Defend Our Juries has now announced its next mass protest for September the 6th in London. It's calling for 1,000 people to take part. Now, from the responses I've seen to the 500 people who were arrested on Saturday, I would certainly not be surprised if they managed to recruit 1,000 people to sit in Parliament Square and also break this law in opposition to the prescription. Peter Hain, who was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, also had this to say about his own experience working with counter-terrorism law. So he said this: "There is a battery of other crimes that could be applied to Palestine action, but terrorism is not one of them. While you also devalue the charge of terrorism by equating it with the protests we have seen. I worked with the intelligence services and others to stop dissident IRA groups from killing. I have signed warrants to stop other real terrorists, Islamist terrorists bombing London. So I am not soft on terrorism, but I am a strong believer that you have to know what it looks like." That's a very sensible position. I mean, as I was sort of talking on Monday's show, wasn't I, about how there are people from all different sort of political camps now saying this is completely ridiculous. Whether or not you support Palestine action, it's just not terrorism. As soon as the show ended, I realized that Andrew Neil had also come out saying that this is ridiculous. So it's not something that's dividing people who are pro or anti-terror laws. It's dividing people who think that Palestine action is a terrorist group, which is an increasingly small group of people, and the people who can see the obvious, which is that they aren't. One MP, though, who is still making the case for the prescription of Palestine action is Stella Creasy. She posted 2 Instagram videos suggesting that MPs need to be clearer about why they voted for prescription on Palestine action. I should say she's the MP for Walthamstow. Here's a clip from one of those videos.
Those of us who voted for prescription need to be clearer about the basis for that. Now, that is more complicated than it should be because the evidence presented to us about the use of violence against individuals is part and parcel of court cases and so couldn't be part of the parliamentary debate. But I will share with this video a number of links to the reports about those examples and the repeated targeting of individuals for intimidation and violence, and also the High Court documents that show that the initial request by the security services and the police for prescription, because that threshold of direct violence had been met, was made in March this year. Now, that is before the attack on Brize Norton. So the call for prescription predates whatever happened at Brize Norton, and it centres on those violent acts.
Now, it's not completely unreasonable to say you can't reveal certain evidence because it might prejudice ongoing court cases. But what is unreasonable is Creasy making statements that simply aren't true. So first, she talks about the repeated targeting of individuals for intimidation and violence. Well, that isn't proved, and it isn't in the evidence presented to the High Court when it came to prescription. What we do know is that a very small number of Palestine Action activists, fewer than 10, are alleged to have been involved in violence since the group was founded 5 years ago. But even if that's proved true, that a few individuals were involved in violence against people, that doesn't mean the whole group is. If that's all it took, then we'd have to prescribe the police or MPs or football fans. Rather, it's on the government to show that those isolated incidents of violence were encouraged or planned by the group rather than spur-of-the-moment acts by individuals. And the government hasn't done that. The second false thing Creasy says is that the security services requested the prescription of Palestine Action for violent acts. But that's not what's contained in the report of the Joint Terror Analysis Centre report submitted by the government, which was revealed in the court application for judicial review into Palestine Action's prescription. Now, JTAC is a committee with members from the security services, the police and various ministries. And in their report on Palestine Action, dated March this year, they say the majority of the group's actions would not be classed as terrorism under the law. This is from The Guardian's reporting on the contents of that report. So the report said the group primarily uses direct action tactics, which typically resulted in minor damage to property. Common tactics include graffiti, petty vandalism, occupation, and lock-ons, it added. JTAC is also clear that their recommendation to prescribe the group is based on damage to property. In other words, there's no mention of violence against people. In fact, the whole intelligence case is based on property damage. Now, the Terrorism Act 2000 does say that, quote, serious damage to property can be a ground for prescription if the actions meet other criteria. But to date, the government has never prescribed an organisation simply because they damaged property, not once in 25 years. The Guardian has also reported on the assessment of the prescription review group, saying this: PRG said a ban would be relatively novel as there was no known precedent of an organisation being prescribed on the basis that it was concerned in terrorism, mainly due to its use or threat of action involving serious damage to property. Now, if Stella Creasy wants MPs to be trusted, she should have been saying all of that instead of pumping out misinformation on her Instagram. Kieran, I've seen lots of people sharing those two videos. They're sort of from Stella Creasy saying, you know, I believe in the suffragettes. I believe in all these sorts of direct action movements, but there were always debates within these groups about whether to be violent or non-violent. And this is just part of that debate. I suppose that the issue being we have law, right? If you're against protests sort of becoming violent, we have laws for that, right? You can charge someone with assault PC. You can charge someone with GBH. Unless an organization is sort of promoting violence, which Palestine Action never has, it has nothing to do with terrorism, right? That's just, you could ban every protest pretty much every protest organization ever because someone on one of their protests has been violent, right? If the organization itself has not called for violence, if that's not a core part of their strategy, which it absolutely is not when it comes to Palestine Action, the core part of their strategy is property damage, then the whole thing is just ridiculous. I think these MPs might come to regret this, especially, you know, maybe the Labour Party in general. Maybe Morgan McSweeney won't because he thinks that in the red wall seats, they don't really care either way. But if you're someone like Stella Creasy, who's going to be under threat from the Greens or the Corbyn Sultana party, and you've got lots of constituents who are quite passionate about Gaza, I think you're going to regret your vote to prescribe Palestine action. What's your take on all this?
My take on it is that if you used the world's most powerful atomic microscope, which I know you like to do, Michael, you would struggle to locate stellar creases, integrity, moral consistency, or shame, actually. You either have to be catatonically stupid or think that the general public is catatonically stupid, or both, to, in one breath, extol the timeless virtues of the suffragettes, a group that, as you said, and as the point has been made many times, was openly and consistently violent in its means, on the one hand, and then on the other, or in the next breath, condemn as terrorists Palestine Action, an organization that has never premeditatedly harmed so much as a hair on a kitten's head. If Stella and her pals wanted to use terror laws properly, there are far, far better candidates, as you've alluded to, Michael. I mean, let's not forget that it was Stella Creasy's pal, Joe Cox, who was murdered by a man who literally said Britain first while he was murdering her. Britain First, not a proscribed organization, a political party, no less, that's allowed to canvass and campaign around mosques and schools and so on. I mean, just imagine if somebody, heaven forbid, murdered an MP and shouted, "Free Palestine," or "Palestine Action." We would all be rounded up, locked up, and kneecapped by midnight. I can tell you that. Similarly, in 2015, 50 members of the EDL were prosecuted, not arrested, prosecuted, 50 members for violent conduct at one of their demos, and some of them received 3 years in prison. That's how serious the violence was. And of course, the EDL have got a long and storied history of attacking police at their demos. The EDL, not a prescribed organization. None of this stands up to any scrutiny at all. It's all nakedly politically motivated, and it's all utter shite. Israel lobby shite. And I'll just end on this. I don't know how many things are going to play out with regards to Palestine. I really don't. I don't know what the future holds on so many things. But I do know absolutely this, that in years to come, Stella Creasy will be regarded in the same way that we today regard the corpulent Edwardian men who decried the suffragettes as menaces to society and crazy women. That's the side of history she's chosen, and she will live long with the consequences.
I mean, sort of in reference to the far right, so elsewhere in her video, she said, "Oh, and by the way, I actually think the government should ban even more groups because there are these far right groups that should also be banned." I actually think we have to be careful with that argument. I just think we should only ban groups as terrorist groups which are actually terrorist groups, right? I just think we should have a sort of simple threshold, which is they have to be advocating mass violence or sort of, violence against people to be classed as a terrorist group. I don't think the EDL are a terrorist group, really, because as far as I know, they have very objectionable racist ideas, which I hate. And then sometimes people on their demos are violent, but I don't think they have a strategy. I don't think they openly advocate for a strategy of sort of killing people or harming people to achieve a political end. I think normally they just get into fights with police when they're a bit coked up on demonstrations. While the British state is defending their strategy of charging grandparents under the Terrorism Act, the evidence of Israel's status as a terrorist state continues to mount. The Associated Press has reported that Israel is in talks with South Sudan about the possibility of resettling Palestinians from Gaza to the East African country. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has long supported the idea of resettling the vast majority of Gaza's population, an idea that was given additional support by US President Donald Trump's proposal to turn Gaza into a luxury beach resort. In an interview with Israeli media on Tuesday, Netanyahu reaffirmed his commitment to the forcible transfer, let's call this what it is, ethnic cleansing, of the population of Gaza, saying this. I think that the right thing to do, even according to the laws of war as I know them, is to allow the population to leave, and then you go on with all your might against the enemy who remains there. Now, you can read between the lines there. He's saying anyone who refuses to leave Gaza would be an enemy and a legitimate target for Israel. So basically, they can kick everyone out. Or they say it's voluntary. You can leave if you want to. Oh, but by the way, if you stay, you're going to have the equivalent of a nuclear bomb dropped on you. The South Sudanese government has denied the report, but the Associated Press article is based on testimony from 6 sources. So this is from that report. Joe Slavic, the founder of a US lobbying firm working with South Sudan, said he was briefed by South Sudanese officials on the talks. He said an Israeli delegation plans to visit the country to look into the possibility of setting up camps for Palestinians there. No known date has been set for the visit. Israel did not immediately respond to a request for confirmation of the visit. Slavic said Israel would likely pay for makeshift camps. And AP goes on to report this. Edmund Yakani, who heads a South Sudanese civil society group, said he had also spoken to South Sudanese officials about the talks. 4 additional officials with knowledge of the discussions confirmed talks were taking place on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss them publicly. 2 of the officials, both from Egypt, told AP they've known for months about Israel's efforts to find a country to accept Palestinians, including its contact with South Sudan. They said they've been lobbying South Sudan against taking the Palestinians. South Sudan is still reeling from the killing of 400,000 people in a protracted civil war. Over 2 million people remain internally displaced, and the country relies on international aid to feed its 11 million citizens. It's plagued by corruption. There remain pockets of famine, and the country is still politically unstable with the possibility of further war in the future. Israel, of course, also has form when it comes to seeking African partners in its fantasy of ethnic cleansing in Gaza. In March, the AP reported that the US and Israel have made contact with the government of war-torn Sudan and Somalia in connection with them taking in uprooted Palestinians or ethnically cleansed, expelled Palestinians, as well as the breakaway state of Somaliland. Kieran, sort of at the start of this genocidal war, sort of the Israelis and even the Americans actually were openly talking about the idea of moving out all of the Palestinians from Gaza. They don't talk about it so openly anymore, sort of as a plan. Behind the scenes, they clearly are. Up to now, this has seemed like a red line for sort of Israelis' partners or Israel's allies, to the extent that they wouldn't be able to get away with this. Do you think that's now changing? I mean, I can't imagine Trump standing in the way of this, but it would be difficult for the Europeans to stand by and watch this happen, I think. What's your interpretation?
So very, very briefly, I just want to quickly say, I also, in reference to the last point or the last story, I also don't think that the ECL and Britain First should be designated terror organisations. I just want to clarify. What I was saying was that if they don't make the grade, then how the hell did Palestine Action make the grade? It's clear it's politically motivated. That was the point I was making. But I agree with you. Terrorism should be very, very restricted. Or terror designations and proscription should be very restricted. So on your question, Michael, I just think that this whole experience for everybody that pays any attention to what happens to Palestine over the past sort of 22 months has been one of normalization of the unthinkable, right? So many things that we thought were completely beyond the pale and completely unthinkable and inoperable almost. You know, how would you operationalize that? How would you actually do that? The story of the past 22 months, besides the most horrific genocidal violence any of us could possibly hope to never have to imagine, is that things that we thought were beyond the pale, even in this pretty fucked up world that we inhabit, that those things have just come to pass. And though civil society has tried to do what it's tried to do very nobly, and I think in some cases, you know, some scattered wins, we can't forget those. Generally speaking, the Israelis are just off the hook and off the chain, and they just get away with it. Now, I don't want to, this is a difficult position to be in. I don't want to say to our viewers and listeners, there's the hope the Israelis are going to do this. They're going to clear Gaza out, and they're also then going to try and move on to the West Bank. They're going to use that new kind of gerrymandering of reality, of the art of the possible, the new normalization. Then they're going to transplant it and apply it to the West Bank and to East Jerusalem, where my own family lives as well. But I have to say, I don't feel confident that I can say that to our viewers and listeners. As for, and this has always been the plan, by the way. I mean, this has always been the fucking plan. I think as far as the Europeans go, again, part of that process of normalization would be that the Europeans, in my estimation, I might be wrong. I'm not a futurologist, but my estimation is that my reckoning is that they will fall in line with whatever Trump wants. Now, I don't doubt that there will be platitudes to the counter. I don't doubt that there will be rhetoric along the lines of kind of what we've been seeing as Palestinians and people who allies for the past 30, 40, 50 years. We need a two-state solution. We reaffirm our commitment to a two-state solution along the resolution, UN resolution lines. We need the 67 borders intact, blah, blah, blah. De facto statements, while on the ground, something quite different happens, or rather abstract statements, while de facto on the ground, something quite different happens. And I suspect that the Europeans will feel no recourse except to hide behind those platitudes again. I can't see any other way to think about it. I don't see Ursula von der Leyen and the organization that she fronts and Keir Starmer and Macron. Of course, there's been some positive mood music. I don't want to reject every gain we make. That kind of obstinacy and puritanism won't get us anywhere. But we've got to a point now where we're talking about the total ethnic cleansing of Gaza, the total removing of everybody. So I have to assume that if Netanyahu says that is what he is intending to do, that it will happen, unfortunately. But I suppose if I can end on any note of positivity, Michael, and our viewers and listeners, it's this. It's that's not the end of the story. Palestinians aren't going anywhere. We might be moving. We might be being forced out. But we will regroup. And we will continue in the diaspora, wherever we are, we'll become a republic of letters, as the old phrase goes. And I have faith that one day that will, those letters and that republic will consolidate into something more material and effective. Worst case scenario, we get moved out. It's not the end of it. It's not the end of the story. We will come back. I have total confidence in that. I don't know when, but that's my 2 cents.
I mean, obviously Israel wouldn't mind that outcome because they say, well, you can come back somewhere else.
Well, I think Israel is going to destroy itself. I think Israel, in the long run, will destroy itself. And it will be destroyed by external pressures, by the international community. And we have to put every single effort into boycotting and divesting and putting sanctions on Israel and, translating civil society, contempt for what Israel does to the Palestinians, translating that solidarity into electoral, quickening it into solid electoral politics, which we hope will then filter via the ballot box into the kind of politics, output that we would hope to see from a government, which means stop selling arms as a bare minimum, expel ambassadors, and so on and so on. I think we'll start to see that kind of thing in the West increasingly over the next 10, 15, 20 years, because I think a lot of people have been radicalized by this. So I do think that as the next kind of generation filters into the corridors of power, be they economic or political, whatever, money still speaks. I'm not being naive about it. It will be a slog. We have to build on the work that we've started. But I do think that we will start to see a change in the discourse in this country and a change by extension at the ballot box in this country and in countries like this country, which have previously been unfettered allies of Israel. But that needs to bring to bear pressure on Israeli society, which I know reasonably well. I'm not I'm not a forensic expert in Israeli society. I've been there a bunch of times. I know people there, Palestinians and Israelis, and I would say that it's a very, very dysfunctional society. Under the hood, under the bonnet, it's a very, very dysfunctional society. And I think the best thing we can do now is try and feed that dysfunctionality and contribute to those inherent antagonisms in Israeli society such that it starts to fall apart as a colony. Those are the only glimmers, the only sources of hope on the horizon as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, in the short term, the Israelis would say, great, that's a great outcome. And it's obviously the last outcome that I want. But with my hard realistic hat on, I can't see any organization, government standing in Netanyahu's way now. And the destruction of Palestinian resistance and those civil society spaces where Palestinian resistance might flourish has been so absolute, has been so total for a concerted effort of Israel, the United States, and its allies in Europe that we're on lockdown. I mean, Palestinian resistance is on total lockdown right now, which is why you see settlers doing whatever they want to Palestinians in the West Bank. Total support of every single institution in Israeli society. Total support of virtually every institution in broader Western society. De facto, I mean, they might, as I say, play mood music to the counter. So, yeah, I think, unfortunately, something very catastrophic has happened to us. And I think something very catastrophic will continue to happen to us. But I suppose my point is that we will, if that comes to pass, we will come back. We will come back.
Okay, on that powerful, if sobering note, let's wrap up. Thank you, Kieran, for joining me tonight.
Oh, thanks for having me, Michael. Yeah, sobering note at the end, but I really enjoyed our chat and our discussion.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.